Okay, welcome to the Road Forward podcast. I'm your host this time, Nick. I'm here with Dominic Covello. He is the regional transportation manager for a large manufacturing company. You've definitely heard of them. Dominic, how you doing today?
I'm okay. How are you today, Nick?
Doing well, doing well. Just moving down the road forward. There you go. Anyways, yeah, so we were chatting the other day, and we're talking right now about technology and its place in transportation and logistics. Couple of interesting topics we had, and let's continue on those. Technology today, the key to mitigating market changes, and then also where technology meets people, maybe the biggest area for operator impact. And you had some opinions on these topics. You guys are doing some pretty interesting things with technology where you work. You want to maybe overview those? What have you guys been doing here recently?
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of on a high level, over the last few years, we've really invested in the safety technologies that have come out to the trucking industry. Our fleet, which is technically a for-hire fleet, predominantly runs our own deliveries, like many of the private fleets out there in the country, and we've really honed in on lane departure, collision mitigation, adaptive cruise controls, and all of those other features that have kind of come out in the last half a decade. All of our new builds are fully equipped with all those features, and we've even put some in-cab dash cameras as well, like most of the industry has done at this point. We've seen significant decreases in the number of accidents and the severity of accidents with all of these technologies in place for our drivers.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Just out of curiosity, you mentioned several things: adaptive cruise control and dash cameras and those type things. What do you think is probably, if you had to prioritize them, what do you think's been the biggest impact to the least? Maybe that's an unfair question, but what are your thoughts on that?
If I were to pick one, if we could only have one, I think I would actually stay with the in-cab dash cameras. Whereas the other items are more tools for drivers, the in-cab dash camera is a full system that gives us the ability to review gameplay footage with a driver, so to speak, and make sure that they're learning continuously throughout their career. So we're able to develop behaviors, hone in on exact training measures that we need with specific individuals that may not be uniform across the board, and create a better, more defensive driving force. So during those conversations or remedial training sessions, we may lean on our tools, like asking a driver to use his adaptive cruise control, but those tools are only in place to support the driver. It's up to the driver ultimately, and the camera gives us that ability to really review that with them.
That's interesting. I think I heard in particular behavior adapting. You say training and adapting behaviors with your drivers is kind of the key. Um, did you get any pushback when you went to install these things, or is there any negative opinion of that? People think that they don't need to change their behaviors.
Absolutely. There's still a lot of those old school truck drivers out there who grew up with none of this stuff. Heck, even when we rolled out the automatic transmissions, it was a bit of a hurdle for us to some degree. But the in-cab cameras were a totally different game for those drivers that had never experienced them before. A lot of these guys, although they may not have been in an accident their entire career or over millions and millions of miles, that doesn't mean they can't improve. And that's really where we kind of, bumped heads when it first rolled out with some of these guys saying, I've never had an issue. Why are we making it an issue? And really, after a year or two in the program, and we can show them the data to support how much better we've gotten as a company, and show them videos that occurred elsewhere in the country where accidents and collisions happened that had no fault of our own driver, and how that camera actually exonerated our driver in some of those cases through litigation. These drivers quickly get on board with the program. And I think, even if you haven't had an accident in a decade or a million miles, that doesn't mean that your behaviors are not as defensive as they can be. So, a lot of drivers have learned, but there are still some that are not the top performers, of course, and we're still working with them every day.
Sure, sure, sure. And that's really where the rubber meets the road on technology and people. I guess working with your workforce so they understand the benefits as well, like you're saying, instead of just mandating top down.
Absolutely. It's tough to manage drivers, especially in today's world. But I often feel like you just gotta treat them like you would want to be treated yourself. Let them know the big picture. Show them the end results. Show them how it benefits the company. Show them how it protects them. Don't just put something in the cab and say you got to do it.
Right, correct. And you mentioned something to me recently about how you thought that driver in the industry, driver compensation was improving, and some of the professionalism along with it. What was that you were telling me again?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing I think has been, kind of long overdue. If you go back 40 or 50 years, being a truck driver was a really honest living, something people sought after. It's a skilled trade. It always has been. It's a professional, position that I couldn't do myself. So I have a lot of respect for these guys, and everybody really should. The guys that are able to be out there safe every day and let your family get home safe as you're driving around them. So for the last decade, 2 decades plus, that's kind of gone the opposite direction. Driving became less and less of something that people were seeking as a new profession, due to a number of factors, compensation being one of those, of course. And in recent history, as we've seen the driver shortages, and that's continued to get worse, compensation has started to make a comeback for sure.
But don't you think that's increased rates across the industry as well? Is that negatively impacted some shippers?
Absolutely. The number two cost in operating a truck is that driver's pay. So, that is 100% a driving force in rates. And that absolutely is impacting the supply chain and the cost of goods at the final customer. There's some unique ways, though, that we've leveraged those same technologies to be able to benefit those drivers. So many companies like us are using those in-cab cameras and other safety measures to do an incentive program for your drivers, basically a safety bonus, so to speak. So, drivers that are performing and saving the company money in other ways, we're giving that back to our drivers. So that's not directly hitting our line haul rates. It's more or less basically still driving our bottom line to improve, and we're giving that back to our drivers.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, definitely incentivizing the right areas. And would you say that any of these sorts of technologies you've mentioned? I know we've talked a lot about safety up to this point, but what about are there things that you guys have done to improve your operations, customer service? Sort of how you guys interact with those above the chain and below the chain of you.
Absolutely. For us, on the trucking side of our business, rather, there are a lot of ways we've utilized technology. We use our our ability through our ELD provider to draw geofences all across the country and measure dwell times, which we can then go to and partner with our operations team to figure out solutions in increasing productivity, getting our drivers loaded and moved through the yard so that we have less hours waiting, more hours driving, and that in turn creates more deliveries per day per driver, driving down our fixed cost per load. So there's ways that we can fight a lot of these increased costs out there on the market by looking at our margins a little bit differently and improving our operations by leveraging these technologies.
Dwell time. That's a four-letter word. That's nobody likes to hear that. And you guys you're definitely measuring that. It sounds like you've got a good beat on it. And then what are some of the tools? Kind of once okay, maybe this area we're getting high dwell times here. What do you guys do to adapt to that?
I'll give you an example. Nothing better than a real story, right? So just last week, actually, one of my biggest facility that I have actually in the Southwest, we looked at that at a really granular level last week, and we looked at a full 30-day measure. We've been measuring it on a weekly basis for some time, but we wanted to look overall, where are our bottlenecks? So we pulled 30 days of data. We looked at it in several different ways. We looked at it by day of the week to see if there was a specific day of the week that had a higher average dwell time or loading time, so to speak. We looked at it by the hour throughout each of those days as well. So what we noticed was at 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning, we had about a 20% 20% longer loading time at our facility versus 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So since we have two shifts there, what we did, we kind of staggered them in a different fashion so that we had more support in the morning, less support in the afternoon, so that that could actually kind of even out across the day and we could maintain the levels that we wanted to throughout the entire day.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's fantastic. So kind of putting the resources where they need to be at the right time, and you've got the data to prove it.
It's all about the data at this point in trucking for sure, absolutely.
You also spoke with me recently about some things in the industry you're not really thrilled upon. You're clearly a technologist. You're kind of leveraging the latest, but there was something about hours of service. You said you wish that if we have any lobbyists here or any politicians listening in, that you had some suggestions for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Just first and foremost, I love what the FMCSA does. They keep our drivers safe. They keep people around them safe out on the roadway. But something that's just kind of sat with me since I started in this industry 16 years ago. Local drivers are very different than over-the-road drivers in many ways, not just the way that they perform every day, but the way that they rest. So their off-duty hours are much different than a driver that's crawling into a sleeper berth at a truck stop somewhere most days of the week, right? So I think the FMCSA would benefit by really identifying that, recognizing it, and setting some different parameters. Today we have the local kind of exception, and you can run under that exemption and not have a logbook, but you still need to operate within those same hours that are regulated, really in a manner that is focused around the over-the-road drivers. So, you have a driver who has a terminal that he needs to get back to, and in our world, these drivers may be doing 5 or 6 deliveries a day. The likelihood of something going wrong over 6 different customers is pretty high. So when guys are running a couple minutes short, I think we need to give them some benefit to get back to that terminal safely instead of making them shut down on the side of the road. In my opinion, that can be less safe to some degree than getting them back to their terminal and then letting them get home to their family appropriately, getting the right rest that they need before back out on the roadway the next day.
Sure. If, off the top of your head, what would you change? Do you think that there's a mileage limit that we could institute, that if you're under this certain mileage, certain number of days a week, or what do you think would be the actual lever that you might pull?
I think there's a couple things we could look at. Mileage is one. We could probably reference some of the verbiage that they have in the personal conveyance exception because that does outline the amount of time that's able to be used and amount of miles that's able to be used. We could also reference some of the stuff that's in the adverse conditions exception because that references it not being known at the time of dispatch. So, if a driver's coming back and he's going to be pushing it, you shouldn't be sending him out to begin with. We need to own that as a company as well. It can't just be on the driver.
Sure, makes sense. Okay. You mentioned you started in this industry 16 years ago.
Yes, sir.
What's a little bit about your background? Have you been on which side of the industry have you been on most of the time? Just for our
So
listeners.
I've been on both sides of the industry. The majority of my career has been on the manufacturing side, where I am today. I started my career in the drayage side of the business, though. I've spent about, I think, 9 of those years now on the manufacturing side, and the other 7 on the drayage side.
Gotcha. And in that time, you've seen a few things, few initiatives come and go, I'm sure. What's been maybe something that you've done in your company over the last year or so that's been really positive? You could maybe talk to others in the manufacturing side. That's maybe one thing that you guys have done recently that you'd say, definitely take a stab at that.
We kind of move with the market, and the best thing we've done recently really is just build out our fleet. So we've grown our fleet tremendously over the last 2 years, but a lot of that's a product of what's going on with rates out in the market and us being able to insulate ourselves from that impact passing on to our customers. So by increasing the size of our fleet, we've been able to reduce our costs as compared to the open market. Whereas what the market was a couple of years ago, it made more sense to outsource more of our deliveries than we do today.
Gotcha. So on the manufacturing side, you guys have invested to bring your marginal costs down. And this has been an inflationary market, so you haven't seen any pushback from your customers on price?
Fortunately, our market, which is building materials, it's up across the board. So it's not like we're the only people going out and saying we need to pass this on to you. It's been pretty universal. So we haven't had as much of a hard time as we may in other markets where we are trying to pass that on.
Sure, sure, sure. Well, I guess um, rising tide across the board helps all ships, maybe, and sounds like you guys have really positioned yourself well. Um, let's see. I wanted to touch in on a couple of industry specific things that you mentioned as well. Some industry favorite conferences that you like to attend every year. For those interested maybe in technology and working on improving some of their processes like you described. Where are you getting some of this information? Is it conferences? Is it industry newsletters or sources? What are some of the places you keep up to date?
A little bit of both. I subscribe to a lot of the standard stuff. Your Morgan Stanley, your NPTC, your normal DAT and cast study stuff that most people in the industry would be subscribed to. So I get a lot of updates there. But as far as really getting in person and listening to speakers and different people from the industry and seeing new vendors that I may not have heard of in person and seeing what they have to offer, I love going to our TMS provider, McLeod, their annual user conference. They have a pretty big event every year, lasts a few days, and there are a ton of vendors that show up, guest speakers, keynotes that you can take away from big players in the industry or influences on the industry, whether from a governing agency, etc. That's probably my favorite one that I go to. I do also like the NPTC user conference every year down in Jacksonville. That's a really good one as well.
Are those coming up, or did we already pass those?
Jacksonville one's every January, so we did pass that. Usually the McLeod conference is early Q4.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. Well, and the last thing I have for you today, Dominic, is what's something maybe you have your eye on for the road forward in your company and your work over the next year? What's the next initiative?
For us, we have all the technologies in place that I think we need in today's world. So for us, it's really starting to be able to cross utilize those technologies. There's so many different things going on in trucking right now. You'll have a different ELD provider than your in-cab camera provider, than your TMS platform, than your telematics that are delivering documents to your drivers to use from their tablets, all kinds of different things going on right now. So for us, it's really about streamlining those work processes, not just for our drivers, but for our dispatchers as well. We want to make sure that we're going from 3 clicks to 1 click in every piece of this workflow moving forward. So we are really working hard at building APIs and EDIs to make our systems talk so that we only have to update things in one place today, whereas it might take twice or thrice as long to do some of those tasks today, whether from the driver's tablet or from our desk in the office.
Sure, sure. So you've got the technology. You're trying to kind of find a way to make it all in one, make the workflow, the data work for you.
Exactly, yeah, and we're leveraging, Power BI is a big one for us. I know there's a couple other big names out there that I'm familiar with as well, but we're leveraging those business intelligence softwares now to bring all that into one place so that we know what's going on in our business. But that doesn't change the end user and how they use those softwares, and that's where we really need to focus, I think.
Fantastic. Okay, Dominic, well, I appreciate your time. For the listeners, remember if you subscribe to our email newsletter, you're going to be able to get the Fast Five questions we're about to ask Dominic here. So be sure to join our subscription list. It's on our podcast page, The Road Forward. But again, Dominic, we appreciate your time. We're going to jump into the Fast Five, and for everybody else, you guys keep up the good work. We'll talk to you next time.